I took my manager out drinking before his big meeting. He got fired the next day, lost his family, and I was offered his job. I would like to begin this post by stating that this is my very first Reddit submission. It's not that I have been living under a rock. I simply had not gotten around to creating an account until now. I thought this would be an excellent opportunity to start. Summary at the end. Approximately a year ago, I was employed part-time as a server and needed to seek additional work because the busy season had slowed down, and I required a more steady income. I was not searching very seriously since my girlfriend and I resided in a condo owned by her parents, and I had virtually no expenses. One evening, my girlfriend and I went out to get dinner from a well-known pizza chain nearby. Inside, there were help-wanted flyers spilling onto the floor. With several years of food service experience, I considered myself a suitable candidate for some extra part-time hours. I informed the manager that I was interested and would submit an application the following day, as I was dressed for picking up pizza. This meant I was wearing a dirty t-shirt covered in dog hair, sweatpants, and flip-flops, definitely not appropriate interview attire. After we took our pizza and left, the manager followed me into the parking lot, practically pleading with me to conduct the interview there and then. I thought this was strange but did not think much of it and ended up being hired. To provide some context, when I mention having food service experience, I refer to several years of management experience, including positions up to assistant store manager at various fast food establishments. The reason I did not pursue a higher-level position was that, as mentioned, money was not a significant concern for me, and at that time, I was merely coasting and saving up to relocate out of state. Once I started, it quickly became evident that my boss, whom I will refer to as Howard, had absolutely no idea what he was doing. Initially, the restaurant lacked daily, weekly, or monthly cleaning tasks, which, if you have worked in fast food, you recognize as an absolute necessity. He consistently failed to answer any questions I posed, directing me to other employees instead. Simple inquiries, such as which side of the oven a particular pizza should go in, were met with confusion. Moreover, he would step out for a cigarette break every 20 minutes. The fact that the store had been open for less than a year and was already in disarray was indicative of the poor management. I later discovered that Howard had previously worked as a janitor, or custodial engineer, as he preferred to say, and had zero experience in food service, yet he somehow managed to get hired as the general manager. I viewed this as an opportunity to earn a little more money while doing the same tasks I would inevitably end up performing. I offered to take on the role of assistant manager, as he had no one else willing to do it, and he had already asked me before. I stipulated that it would remain a part-time position since I enjoyed my serving job and did not wish to give it up. I proposed dedicating my time to instructing him on the behind-the-scenes aspects that fast food training manuals and online tests omit. This included how to create effective schedules, how to develop weekly cleaning charts, and how to prepare weekly build-to-orders for shipments. He cheerfully accepted my proposal. Howard and I were the only two managers at that store, with the rest of the staff consisting of 2 drivers and 5 employees. He scheduled me for 2 open-to-close shifts consecutively on his days off so that he could keep them for himself each week, justifying it by claiming he worked open-to-close shifts on the days I wasn't there because a manager had to be present to manage any cash from the safe. He had never worked a single double shift. I endured this for a few weeks, during which time literally every single employee, except for me, Howard, and a driver we will call Jeff, either quit or was replaced by new hires. Jeff and I became fast friends, sharing a mutual affinity for cannabis and a laid-back attitude. We also enjoyed exchanging unflattering comments about Howard. Jeff was Howard's neighbor and would occasionally sell him some marijuana, which gave him inside information. It became apparent to me that there was some financial issue at play since we were receiving significantly more tips from credit card transactions reported at the front counter than cash deposited into the employee tip bag. This was not the easiest discrepancy to catch since he would accumulate the tips for 2 weeks and distribute them to employees in alternating weeks from payday. However, due to the disorganized nature of the store, it was difficult to determine if money was being misappropriated or if it was merely a case of incorrect data entry. One particular night, I was closing the store and encountered difficulties reconciling the cash drawers. The numbers simply were not adding up. I called Howard, who answered in a disoriented manner filled with slurred speech. I explained the issues I was facing, and he attempted to guide me through them but was either too inebriated or, more likely, unaware of the answer. I mentioned that I would contact his boss, whom I had met a couple of times and who had invited me to reach out with any questions. Howard immediately panicked and exclaimed, "Don't do that. They don't want anyone knowing how to handle the numbers on the point-of-sale system. Otherwise, they will think they're trying to steal money." Knowing this was a ridiculous response, I countered, stating that it made no sense. How could I resolve the issue if I did not understand how it worked? Then he uttered the words that set off a chain reaction leading to his downfall. "Listen, you are asking too many questions regarding the cash. It makes you look very suspicious, as if you are the one stealing money." I told him I would leave things as they were, and he could address them the next morning if he could. I had to be cautious because, in food service, if the possibility of theft arises, most places will terminate you immediately, as they can easily replace you with any teenager. Because of this, and due to my own moral code, being labeled a thief is something I cannot tolerate. So I devised a plan with Jeff, who was entirely on my side and had harbored suspicions about Howard for quite some time. Jeff was aware that Howard was an alcoholic who could never resist a night out at karaoke. Interestingly, despite his incompetence, Howard was the most desperate people-pleaser I have ever encountered. He had begged me multiple times to hang out with him for drinks or to come over and smoke with me. To put this into perspective, I am 24, and he was 32 with a wife and 2 children at home. We decided to invite him out for a karaoke night the evening before he had a crucial meeting with his boss and the vice president of training for the entire company. Naturally, since both Jeff and I extended the invitation, he was unable to decline. I ended up having an enjoyable time that night, not because Howard was great company, but because my plan involved purchasing at least 7 Jaeger bombs, a double shot of Patron, and quite a bit of beer, which required me to partake in a fair amount to avoid looking suspicious. What a burden, I know. My girlfriend, who was designated as the designated driver, dropped him off at home around 5:30 in the morning after a lengthy smoke session at my house, which was, of course, my idea. It is no surprise he failed to show up for work the following day. He called and informed his boss, who was already at the store, that his child had to go to the hospital the prior night and that he was still in the emergency room. They called me around 11 a.m. to come in and cover his shift. Upon my arrival, I asked Howard's boss about the reason for his absence, and when he shared the explanation, I responded, "Really? I happened to stop by that karaoke bar last night for a few hours, and he was there. I wonder why he took his child instead of his wife." I then showed him a picture of an evidently intoxicated Howard and me. They proceeded to fire Howard within 30 minutes, and they offered me his position since I had more experience and was already effectively managing the store and training new employees. I would have been perfectly satisfied with Howard's dismissal. I never anticipated receiving an offer for his job and was completely taken aback. However, I ultimately declined the position as I did not wish to take on the stress the role entailed. It is said that the best gifts keep on giving, and so do the most satisfying revenge schemes. Howard's wife ended up kicking him out, requesting a divorce and full custody of their children. He went to Jeff's house, where he sobbed and cursed me for destroying his life simply to take his job from him. I would have given anything to witness his reaction when Jeff told him that I did not accept the position and quit shortly thereafter. Summary: my boss, who was misappropriating funds, accused me of stealing, so I took him out drinking and got him heavily intoxicated the night before an important meeting. He ended up fired, lost his wife, children, and home, while I was offered his position. Story 2. Moved in, discovered mold, landlord ignored us after months of research, tests showed toxic levels. House condemned, we moved out. This is my inaugural post on pro-revenge. Throughout my college years, I have experienced numerous unpleasant living situations, but this one stands out. It is quite lengthy, so consider yourself warned. I had recently relocated to a house shared with 2 other young women. Although the residence was not ideal, it appeared acceptable for a college apartment. One of my housemates had a friend who previously lived there and informed us that the landlord was sexist and rather unpleasant. though he generally meant well and offered reasonable rent. For the purposes of this narrative, I will refer to him as the incompetent landlord. We were all financially strapped, so we opted to sign a lease. I should have recognized the warning signs when the incompetent landlord insisted on signing the lease at a local diner shortly after finishing his meal, especially since the lease agreement seemed hastily compiled from various online lease templates. We discovered this apartment through a listing on Craigslist. Initially, everything seemed fine. I was living alone until the new school year began, often staying at my boyfriend's place and not being home frequently. The house was divided with an apartment in the basement and ours on the first floor. However, it wasn't long before I began to notice some troubling developments. We experienced significant rainfall, typical for the Midwest during springtime near local lakes. Water would accumulate on the concrete steps leading to the house, which I had to leap over, and it would surprisingly disappear overnight. Additionally, a musty odor started permeating the house, and I found myself coughing and sneezing more frequently without understanding the cause. Eventually, my housemates moved in, and we started encountering issues with the incompetent landlord. He would not inform us of his visits to inspect the property, claiming he needed to keep up appearances and mow the lawn, yet his visits were too frequent for our comfort. He would argue with us about our right to have copies of our own lease and insisted we pay our rent in cash, particularly before his trips to his cabin up north with his girlfriend. However, the most significant issue was the mold problem, which he dismissed entirely. For a while, we had little communication with the tenants in the basement apartment, until they too began facing problems with the incompetent landlord. We heard them arguing and yelling below us just as often as we did upstairs. Their living conditions were dire. Everything they possessed was infested with mold. They dealt with numerous pests, earwigs, beetles, ants, and other insects. They frequently disposed of clothing, dishes, furniture, and even college assignments because they were all contaminated with mold. They invested in plastic storage containers to protect their belongings, but even those became moldy. We discovered they were initially supposed to have a third roommate in the basement, but she could not move in due to her mold allergies after signing the lease. Additionally, we learned that the incompetent landlord had verbally abused her and her mother over the phone to the point that they were in tears, leaving her trapped in the lease. She ended up paying rent for 2 residences each month to avoid living there since he would not permit her to terminate her lease. Living upstairs was not as dreadful as the basement, but it was still problematic. Each month, all of us became increasingly ill and began waking up each night coughing. Despite our efforts to ventilate the house, nothing alleviated our symptoms. Eventually, I contracted a severe case of strep throat that was so painful that every swallow made my eyes tear up, and I vocalized my discomfort. I later inquired with my doctor if he could confirm that it was caused by mold, but unfortunately, he could not provide a definitive statement. As an outspoken and well-meaning individual studying architecture, I attempted to explain our situation to him. We lacked proper air circulation, and the concrete steps and foundation walls were unsealed, allowing the water I had to leap over to likely seep into the basement walls, contributing to the mold issue. We also identified several areas on the roof that required repairs, as we had noticed some leaks, among other concerns. Furthermore, the basement apartment had cheap patio doors as their sole entrance and exit, which invariably encountered standing water during rain, exacerbating the situation. The so-called intelligent, incompetent landlord dismissed our concerns, considering us merely a group of young women complaining about trivial matters, and refused to take us seriously, despite my assurances that I was learning about these issues in school and understood the topic well. He would not allow us to terminate the lease, no matter how hard we pleaded. Thus, all of us in both apartments concluded that we had to escape, even if it meant going to great lengths. We began researching tenant and apartment laws in our state and city to facilitate our exit. We paid attorney fees, documented the mold in both apartments with photographs, and communicated with various city officials and law enforcement, compiling everything into a comprehensive file. After deferring my rent payment to obtain a copy of the lease from the incompetent landlord, we finally had the opportunity to review the legal document and utilize it in our efforts to leave. We were also collaborating with another landlord from a local rental agency, whom I'll refer to as the good landlord. Thankfully, he was doing everything in his power to assist us in escaping our terrible situation and transitioning into one of his properties. He provided us with all the legal information we needed regarding renting and helped us identify a potential loophole. After several months filled with arguments, expenses, and research, we discovered a crucial detail. If we submitted a mold test to a laboratory, and the results indicated levels above the acceptable limit for safe habitation, we could vacate the property. It was safe to assume that our intuition was correct regarding the mold levels. A few days later, we received the test results which we submitted to the city, accompanied by our comprehensive collection of photographs, statements, and lease agreements. Not even 4 hours after submission, we received a call from the city authorities. Our house was so heavily infested with mold that we were required to vacate the apartment within 24 hours, and it was to be condemned. We were overjoyed. Our efforts had finally paid off, even though it was alarming to learn that the mold concentration was so elevated that the mold researcher, with over 30 years of experience, claimed he had never encountered a property with such high levels of mold infestation. This included black mold. Fast forward to the day we gleefully packed our belongings, with our parents helping us move out. Meanwhile, the tragic, incompetent landlord wept in our driveway as we cheerfully loaded boxes into vehicles, lamenting that he should have listened to us, claiming that the property belonged to his girlfriend and she would undoubtedly leave him. The next day, we took a picture smiling in front of the condemnation notices. It remains one of my favorite photographs to this day. He certainly got what he deserved for ignoring the concerns of his tenants. Update: in response to numerous inquiries, some of which I have buried in the comments below, I decided to share them here regarding the aftermath of our ordeal. It turns out that the city was aware of many of the dubious actions he had taken. When we spoke to them, they seemed to regard him as an eye-roll landlord. They were aware of other grievances he had with tenants, but had been unable to take action until our case. He managed to evade accountability because it was a small town. Unfortunately, there were not many regulations governing bad landlords unless they committed blatantly illegal actions, which made our situation particularly challenging. Additionally, about a year later, I noticed more college students residing in that house again. We suspect he may have utilized one of those at-home mold testing kits to prepare the property for leasing again, or somehow contested the city's findings. I am unaware of what renovations he may have conducted, aside from removing much of the carpeting. I felt sympathy for those new tenants. I wished them well, hoping their experience would not be as traumatic as ours. While I regret that matters did not conclude differently, I hope he learned the importance of genuinely assisting his tenants when they require help. I do not harbor hatred for him, but it is clear he has issues to address. Some individuals have also asked why we didn't pursue legal action. We could have, but it would not have been a wise investment of our time and resources, as we were all set to graduate in a few months and were financially drained from consulting with lawyers. We did explore our options, but ultimately concluded that vacating the property and severing ties was the most prudent course of action rather than prolonging the situation. Story 3. I've never cheated, yet she accuses me constantly. After 6 months, it feels like I'm losing my mind. How do I fix this? My girlfriend and I have been in a relationship for approximately 6 months now. Occasionally, seemingly as a result of anxiety, she expresses unfair and distorted remarks towards me. She has numerous irrational worries, some are more irrational than others, and projects them onto me in a manner that is neither fair nor courteous. She is essentially free to say anything she likes to me, and if I attempt to set boundaries, she retorts with, "I am entitled to express myself," or something similar. While that may be true, I still believe that not everything she brings up is reasonable for her to even contemplate. For example, she is extremely worried that I will cheat on her or interact with other women. I even had to remove all female contacts from my social media because, at one point, if she spotted another woman in my feed, she would question, "Who is that?" I also had to cut ties with a couple of ex-partners I had not dated in nearly a decade. To some extent, I understand her feelings. I have faced infidelity numerous times and went through a challenging period when I was unintentionally controlling due to my insecurities. However, that was long ago, and I moved past it so as not to be unjust in future relationships. Yet, with her, this pattern seems unending. She frequently makes unreasonable comments out of the blue. We might be enjoying a good week, and then I will notice her feeling down for some reason. When I inquire, which I now realize is a mistake, she suddenly comes at me with, "I feel like you enjoy the attention from other women because you experience loneliness," or, "I believe you still have feelings for your ex," or, "I just wish you would be truthful and share your thoughts with me." Such remarks frustrate me. She often conveys them with such certainty and hostility. She even narrows her eyes at me while expressing these thoughts, as if she knows for certain that I'm being deceitful. For context, I was single for 2 years prior to entering this relationship. I have never been desperate for attention and have never cheated on anyone in my life, not even once. Regardless, I inform her that her assertions are entirely unjust and misrepresentative, and that I have always been forthcoming with her. Naturally, I explain how unhappy I am that she holds such minimal trust in me. However, she tends to stand her ground and even accuses me of not being truthful in those moments. Or she will try to frame her allegations as mere concerns, despite them being presented as facts about me, delivered with complete confidence. They are practically infused with judgment. Undoubtedly, this annoys me tremendously because she has no justification for doubting my integrity. When I illuminate this, she regurgitates her familiar line of, "I'm merely expressing myself," or "just stop feeling accused," or something similar. If I attempt to clarify that it is not truly expressing feelings, to make unfounded accusations against me, she responds with, "I can't engage in this right now," or "Fine, I'll never express myself or share concerns again," or even, "You don't have to be with me." To me, this is obviously a form of deflection and gaslighting. I mean, at the very least, it's manipulative. Eventually, I become quite frustrated and raise my voice slightly, attempting to articulate that I should not have to tolerate baseless or disgusting accusations. And if she cannot voice her concerns without tarnishing my character, then I cannot continue in this relationship. The most frustrating part is that she was disloyal to her ex to be with me, which makes her accusations directed at me feel particularly hypocritical. Nevertheless, as I strive to communicate that it's unfair to express herself through wrongful accusations because she is worried, she inevitably makes a comment that infuriates me even more. I mean, it is genuinely one of the most exasperating statements. She almost always says, "You cannot speak to me like that." Here I am, endeavoring to explain how it is unjust the way she speaks to me, and she turns it around and claims it is unfair the way I communicate with her. To be clear, she manages to invoke my rage to the point where I am barely able to control myself from screaming, but every single time she delivers the, "You can't speak to me like that," line when I am essentially delivering the same message to her, it makes me consider ending things right then and there. Often, I actually do. But she calls me later to apologize for pushing me and for her words, etc. So, we reconcile because she finally acknowledges her actions. However, this reconciliation never lasts long. Often, by the conclusion of her apology, she begins to highlight what I was doing wrong, which apparently was raising my voice and becoming frustrated with her for her unjust accusations. She frequently insists, "I was not accusing you," even though she was explicitly doing so and even asserting that she is not naive and knows it is all true. Don't misunderstand me after the "you cannot speak to me like that" remark. I do curse and become exceedingly angry, saying things like, "Have you lost your mind?" or "You are being an arrogant person," or similar comments. I am not proud of it, but the level of hypocrisy is so outrageous that I find myself easily provoked into that agitated mindset, and the entire situation feels suffocating. It causes me to act in ways I haven't since I was in my early 20s, and it is humiliating. I understand that the appropriate course of action may be to walk away, but that is not what I seek. I do not want to give up on this relationship. The crux of the issue is that she attempts to shift the narrative to portray me as the toxic individual for gradually losing my composure due to her outrageous accusations, yet it is never a sudden explosion from me. She literally provokes me to the brink for about an hour until I feel flush with disgust over her words. At that point, I am definitely saying all sorts of things. I cannot help but wonder if she is aware that this reaction will occur, as she remains closed off about her feelings but sulks for hours for no valid reason. And of course, I want her to feel comfortable opening up and expressing her concerns, but it is always about some nonsensical issue regarding me, characterized and relayed in the most deceitful manner. She has never been correct about any of her concerns. I recognize the trauma she carries, but her validation of her behavior while scrutinizing mine feels laughably misguided. I always apologize for overreacting, but this cycle has persisted for nearly our entire relationship. Now she behaves as though she cannot confide in me for fear I'll overreact, when her method of opening up consists solely of accusing me of actions I would never consider or expressing unjustified doubts about me. However, when she is not behaving this way, we have a wonderful connection. For most of the week, we are fantastic together. But, on one certain day, she transforms into a spiteful and resentful individual devoid of any empathy. Recently, she has tried to assert statements like, "If I have an issue, I won't come to you," or, "The reason I say those things is because of how you communicate with me," which is incredibly outrageous considering I have never affirmed anything offensive to her that was not initiated by her vile accusations against me. To provide context, this is the same girl who, during our initial meeting, stated, "You're not going to harm me, are you?" She is someone who is deeply mistrustful and makes veiled accusations toward me for no logical reason. I probably should have distanced myself, but I do sincerely care about her. We share a remarkable history and genuinely like each other, or so I believe. How can I communicate to her that I am not the source of the problem? We would literally never argue if she did not initiate accusations or utter hurtful remarks at random moments. I strive to prevent our conversations from escalating into disputes, but I am exhausted, and it occurs more rapidly now than it once did because I am so weary of this whole recurring routine. I lose my composure without any intention of doing so, as the entire situation is so perplexing that I cannot comprehend how the blame shifts to me in the first place. She claims I am shouting when I am merely elevating my voice slightly, and so on. It truly feels like a psychological manipulation designed to make me lose my sanity. I do not want to lose this girl, but I refuse to endure a relationship in which I am portrayed as a verbally abusive person simply because I cannot silently endure the humiliation of being treated like I am worthless for absolutely no reason at all. Again, I have done nothing to warrant this treatment. She merely identifies random behaviors as suspicious and chooses to bombard me with these imagined offenses whenever she is in a negative mood. Is there a way to reach her? Story 4. I introduced my husband's new girlfriend, he left me, then begged to come back. Years later, I still can't shake the betrayal. My husband, who is 47 years old, and I, who am 43 years old, have been in a relationship for over 2 decades. Initially, we faced numerous challenges, including incessant arguments, poor treatment of one another, and a generally toxic atmosphere. The situation escalated significantly around Christmas in 2009 when I failed to register our daughter's name for a gift charity. We argued vehemently about this because we had very few presents to place under the tree that year, making for a bleak holiday. The dispute grew so severe over the phone that he told me to pack his belongings. He threatened to leave me. Fueled by anger, I decided that was what needed to happen, so I gathered all his clothes into a bag and left it ready for him when he returned home. He went to stay with his aunt and her children, while I remained in the house with our daughter. Although it is not central to the story, I should mention that this daughter is not his. She is mine from a previous relationship. At the time, I was unaware of certain details, but his aunt had a friend who was on a layover in our city for approximately 24 hours. Before our conflict escalated, the aunt and her friend visited our home to pick up my husband. Having heard much about her, I introduced myself and embraced her, which is unusual for me as I generally dislike physical contact. My husband accompanied those two, and it seemed they developed a connection shortly before Christmas. Therefore, when we separated and he moved in with his aunt, it was due to his involvement with this woman. For several months after our separation, We oscillated between fighting, reconciling, and clashing again. I was utterly heartbroken and eager to win my husband back, but he was too irritated with me for being so difficult. He was also challenging to communicate with, remaining staunchly unwavering and refusing to return home. I recall one time when he stopped by to collect something and we spoke briefly, during which I got down on my knees, pleading with him to come back. He resisted and insisted that I cease such behavior. I felt humiliated doing that, but held on to the hope that he might change his mind. Later, I discovered that he had been unfaithful with that girl. She returned to our town intermittently for several months, during which he decided to visit her permanently. Suddenly, he cut ties with her and resolved to return to me. We argued on and off, but the atmosphere remained tense and uncomfortable. Just when I thought we were moving forward, I awoke in the middle of the night to see the computer screen lit up with an open email. My husband was missing. I rose to check the computer, only to find an email address registered to her. My heart sank. I then heard him outside on the porch, talking to her on the phone at 3 a.m. Once again, he left me, and I was simply too exhausted to confront him about it any longer. In April, my grandmother, with whom I was very close and who my husband and I had cared for in her final days, passed away. I called him to inform him of her death, and he appeared completely unaffected. The girl could be heard in the background, advising him that he should not be concerned about my loss, leading to a swift end to our phone conversation. I was profoundly troubled, but managed all the arrangements by myself, gradually moving forward in my life. I decided to renovate the house, spending my sleepless evenings painting or tackling various chores. Despite the fact that it was her awful friend who had taken my husband, I maintained a friendly relationship with his aunt, who encouraged me to explore dating. I eventually agreed to meet a man she knew, who showed genuine interest in me, which boosted my spirits. Then one night, I received notification that my husband was attempting to get in touch with me. I had blocked him on all platforms, but I chose to allow him to reach me from a new account. He explained that he suddenly woke up to find himself in the same city as her, where he had been for weeks, and came to the realization that he had made a terrible error. He wanted to come home for good and leave her behind. I firmly told him no, as I had moved on and had no desire for him anymore. He implored me repeatedly, but I remained resolute. He claimed he was on his way to the airport, had purchased a ticket, and would walk to our home if I refused to collect him. I told him to leave me alone, as I had a date that evening and was indifferent to his return. Ultimately, I did pick him up, though I was still upset. He promised to make amends and said we would work this out together. Initially, I felt indifferent, but he made sincere efforts to improve our situation. Within weeks, we rekindled our relationship, and he successfully distanced himself from the other woman. Within 6 months, we were in a solid place and discovered I was pregnant. Almost exactly 1 year after he left, we received this news. He treated me exceptionally well after that, as if things had always been as they should. We welcomed our baby and never heard from that girl again. Now, my challenge is that I still cannot move past the past. Occasionally, and particularly last night, I experience nightmares in which he is with another woman. In these dreams, he tells me we can no longer be together and pleads for me to leave him alone. Sometimes these dreams are brief, and I try to dismiss them without mentioning them to him, but last night I must have experienced 3 or 4 such dreams. He woke me this morning after hearing me cry. I awakened feeling confused, hurt, and angry with him, as the feelings seem so real each time. He has changed significantly since then, and we have truly resolved our prior issues. We hardly fight anymore. We cherish each other deeply, yet I remain burdened with these unresolved emotions that persist. I recently shared with him that I still grapple with feelings related to those days, but he responded that there is nothing he can do now, implying it is my personal issue to address. I do trust him around other women. That is not the problem. I fear this will never truly heal. I feel betrayed and foolish, grappling with the knowledge that my husband replaced me with someone else, while others, his aunt, my brother and sister-in-law, and even his aunt's children, seemingly witness their inappropriate behaviors. I feel as though I was callously discarded for someone else. What if she comes back? Would he still feel the same about her? It is all too difficult to discuss. I am uncertain of what I hope to achieve by posting this. I understand that therapy is the only genuine path to working through my feelings. I wish I could confront that girl and express how deeply her actions harmed me, but I also do not want to grant her that satisfaction. This situation is incredibly frustrating. I have even chosen to avoid vacationing in the city where they spent time together, a prominent tourist destination within our state, and whenever I hear her name, which is a continent, I am reminded of my pain. It feels so trivial, and I long for it to simply fade away. Thank you for allowing me to share this lengthy account. In summary, my husband was unfaithful to me with a family friend, and the emotional scars from that experience still haunt me, even though our relationship has improved and the infidelity has not recurred.